Okay.
Hello. Today is May 2nd, 2025. My name is Chip O'Brien, representing the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives as a volunteer from the Learning Center Senior Citizens, Inc. I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Deborah Johnson-Simon for the Everyone Has a Story project through the Savannah Community Memory Project. We are conducting this interview at the Learning Center, 3025 Bull Street, Savannah, Georgia. Thank you, Deborah, for sharing your story with us today. Let's start at the beginning, Deborah. Can you tell us your full name, where you were born, and some details about your family and your childhood?
Yes, Chip, I'll be happy to do that. I'm the eldest of two daughters, born to Russell and Leona Williams, native Virginians. And I was born September in 1949 in Petersburg, Virginia. And I was named at birth Deborah Ann Williams. Later I can tell you, not for this interview because it'll take too long, how I got to be Dr. Deborah Johnson-Simon. So far from my birth name. But I'd like for you to know that my sister and I are in the middle of two brothers, one older and one younger. We lived in a historic neighborhood in Petersburg, Virginia, and it was called Blandford. And those who were history buffs will know that that was a very important community in the early Virginia history. My father worked at Fort Lee, and my mother was a biology major, and she worked at Petersburg General Hospital as a lab technician. In the early 1960s, my family moved to Baltimore, Maryland, seeking richer opportunities for us. In the 49, 50s, when I was born, very segregated community, and opportunities weren't plentiful for those that were in that area of work at my parents. My father in Baltimore got to work at U.S. Public Health Hospital. It's a highly regarded veterans hospital. And my mother had an even richer opportunity working at the Johns Hopkins Hospital in the city of Baltimore as a cytology technician. And that was a pretty amazing opportunity for them. We were raised during segregation, as I mentioned earlier, but grew up in a household that emphasized faith, education, and dignity. Our parents taught us to respect the law, but also to work towards changing injustices.
Well, that's very, very interesting. Thank you. Deborah, could you go on and discuss and describe your educational journey?
Oh, certainly. I'd be happy to. Let me just start from my first school experience. Again, I was in the Blandford community, and schools were segregated, and I went to Blandford Elementary School. And it was an amazing opportunity as I think back on it. Although I never really had a chance to encounter other students than students who look like me. My teachers look like me. The administration looked like me. And even more importantly, during that time, a lot of the teachers and administrators lived right within the same community that we lived in. And therefore, they were our Sunday school teachers, vacation Bible school teachers, and because in Petersburg, there was an HBCU, Virginia State College, where my mother would take classes from time to time and take me on that campus with her. We had an opportunity, my siblings and I, to go to activities and take different kind of classes and things on that campus. And some of the students that were on that campus also became our practice teachers in school. Later, when we moved to Baltimore, it was my first opportunity to go to an integrated school. And I went to Garrison Junior High School and Forest Park Senior High School. And the area that we lived in, you know, it was my first chance to really interact with other than people of color. And so it was really interesting. After high school, I married and traveled as a military spouse. During the time I graduated from high school, it was the Vietnam War. A lot of those young men and women were drafted to go to war. It was also kind of the height of the civil rights movement. I graduated in '68, and so I married right out of school. So I didn't have a chance to go from high school right to college, and so I was a single mom for many years. And once my kids finished high school, it was my chance. Then they gave me the opportunity to go back and do. He's like, okay, Mom, you go ahead. And so I did. I earned a BA degree in anthropology, and African American Studies was my minor from Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. I went from there to earn a master's in museum anthropology, being one of the first women of color to graduate with such a degree from that program at Arizona State in Tempe, Arizona. And I earned a PhD in anthropology from the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida. So that's my educational journey.
Well, that's amazing, Deborah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So once you completed your PhD, what path did your career take, especially leading to your founding the African Diaspora Museology Institute?
I love that you were able to even get all of that out, because a lot of people have a struggle with it. You must have practiced, Chip. So, needless to say that an older woman of color with degrees in anthropology and museum studies, and trying to focus on Black museums in particular. Very few people in museum anthropology focused on Black institutions, because actually on that academic landscape, there are very few that are recognized, although there are many, and we have to look at the types. So there weren't, even when I was in school, getting funding, having someone fund someone. I could have worked on millions of other things that were highly supported, but I think going back as an older person, it really had me focus on what I needed to do. And one of the things that I learned, and I also teach my students when I get a chance to teach anthropology, is that when you get to the higher degrees, you should be able to carve out your own path to see what kind of thing you want to make. And coming as an older person, having raised kids and now having grandchildren, who often said to me, Grandma, I just can't believe you wanted to be 100 and still be going to school. You know, we're trying to figure out how not to do that. And so with few job opportunities available, you know, even in teaching, museum anthropology, let me just back up just a minute. It leads you to look at anthropology in all of its subfields. So it lends itself to a lot of things. But how do you study it in terms of the Black Museum is a thing that I had to figure out how to carve out. So a lot of my work and probably my philosophy was that I needed to find my tribe, my own group of folk who would be interested and start to be dedicated, because you want to train up that next generation to carry on the work that you're doing. So that's one of the things that led me to, while I was doing the work, to start to find a way to make this kind of work have a legitimacy. Because Black Museum anthropology, which you will rarely see that term, is one of those areas that needed more attention. And fortunately, I was energized by it not being a lot, because that way I could look to see what it really was and what it really needed to be. So it allowed me to focus on documenting and sustaining Black Museum's legacy while mentoring young people in the field.
And you'd mentioned to me that you discovered a directory, Blacks in Museum Directory. Could you comment on that?
Oh, I'd love to. For many years when I was going through school, you know, in academic studies, you have to find who else has written about this area of research that you're doing. What are the pieces that you can tangibly put in your hand and touch and quote from? Who's written papers on these things? And it was very few. But I was fortunate to be to learn about these museum associations, and there was only one museum association at the time I was learning that focused on Black museums, and that was it was then called the African American Museum Association, AAMA, and they organized in 1978. They exist today as the Association of African American Museum, AAAM. And I became a member in the 80s when I was still going to school. And so I met some of these people who were sort of pioneers in the Black museum field. And in 1983, to get some of the first funding through what's today IMLS, the Institute for Museum Studies, and they produced a directory that they call Blacks in Museums. And it was to combat that sort of a thing that was going on, that Blacks weren't really represented in the field as professionals. And therefore, you know, a lot of the jobs that were available in museums weren't going to them. And because our museums weren't necessarily on this kind of literary landscape, we then were overlooked when, they were trying to get major funding to do the programs and things that were necessary in their communities. So Dr. Rowena Stewart, who started who was at that time was the director for the in Providence, Rhode Island, the Rhode Island Black Historical Society. She was the president of the association at that time in 1983. And they produced this directory. In that directory were over 300 entries in all the different fields, from individuals to institutions to archivists, you name it. It was this wonderful list. To me, that was just a gold mine, and it became the beginning of my work. I stumbled across it because I had gone back to Maryland to take care. My parents were aging, and I had gone back to take care of my mother, who was showing signs of dementia. And my dad, who was just 1 year younger than her, was trying to, do everything for her. So I had gone back, and I was hired to work as in the James E. Lewis Museum of Art, and they were a part of Morgan State University. Morgan was one of the first HBCUs to have a museology program, a museum studies program. And it was centered in the art gallery. James Lewis, who started it, had not only done archaeology work to start to build a collection for Morgan, but was also a sculptor. And this museum had an art gallery, and they also owned 2 other museums, and they had students who were in the program. So for me, that was wonderful. And as I was starting to process some of the materials that was there, I ran across this directory, and it was his directory. And it was, I started to ask people when I would go to the meetings for the association, did anybody know about it? Because I could show them, I was like, your name is in that directory. And I didn't take the best care of it. It was really frivolous, even though it was sort of offered to me to, sort of process as a part of the collection. And I took it and I said, I'll do a session on it. And people didn't have it. Some of them hadn't seen it, and they were remembering some of the people. And so it was in that rich environment, while I was there to care for my parents, that it was the beginning of me knowing what I'd like to do. I'd like to put a face and a story to everybody that was in that directory. Wouldn't that be a wonderful opportunity for people to know who were the pioneers of the Black Museum movement?
Wow, that's a gold mine
Yes.
that you found and got you really started into and developed your passion. Before we go too much further, can you set the stage by defining some key terminology used in your career for our audience?
Oh, certainly.
Museum anthropology, more generally, Black museum anthropology, culture keeper, spelled with a K,
Yes,
so those kind of things.
Yes. Okay, and I always have fun with this because generally when people get me talking, I start throwing out these things, and they're like, okay, I don't really want to embarrass myself by saying I don't know what she's talking about. So I want to start too by saying that we weren't always called ADMI, African Diaspora Museology Institute. We started off as CFSAADMC, Center for the Study of African and African Diaspora Museums and Communities.
That's a long one.
That's what everybody said. Not only do you have a long name, the center has a long name, and the students, I was like, I'll give you a good grade if you just remember what this is about and what you're doing. So, but like you, I also had to make sure that they knew these terms, because these aren't terms that are necessarily a part of our, any normal anthropology course that you take. Most anthropology is centered on the 4 subfields. That's archaeology, there's biological and physical anthropology, where you look at the beginnings of the biological process. Then there's cultural, and then there's linguistic. So where does museum anthropology fall within that if you're taking an intro course? And so for me, it was very important for them to know that all of these subfields neatly fit into museology. And therefore, whether you're interested in cultural anthropology or linguistics, how words, how we communicate, if you're looking at how we came to exist in the world, or archaeology, what's under all of those rocks and things, it all fits. So that sort of defines museum anthropology. Formally, or just, a cheap definition is that it's the study of museums by anthropologists and the work they do within them. It looks at how museums shape and reflect the society. So that longer definition is a little bit, the brief is good, but me kind of pulling it out. Okay, so then what is Black museum anthropology, right? So because, as I mentioned earlier, we're not a part of, less than museum anthropology, that Black experience is even less represented. As a matter of fact, it's almost like the size of a tiny cell that you need a microscope to see. But basically, Black museum anthropology is a space where history, activism, cultural pride intersect. It's about studying and supporting Black museums, telling their stories, or our stories, by us, for us. So when I was working with my grandson, we were doing, he had come to Savannah to visit me. He was about 7 or 8 at the time, and I was working on the Kaya Museum here in Savannah. It's in West Savannah. And we were riding around, and I was showing him that there were other museums that were significant. And he's the youngest of all the grandchildren. Everybody else is grown out the door. And so he's more like an only child. And so he was kind of my hope for somebody understanding this work. And so from the time of his birth, he was born 1 month before my mother passed, and I had my mother here in Savannah. He was born in August. So we decided we were going to work on a book, because when I showed him some of the spaces, and then I showed him the Kaya Museum, he said, "Grandma, I hate to tell you, but that building is broke." And I said, well, that's what can happen if we don't tell the stories of these places. And then we were headed out to Pinpoint. And before we got to Pinpoint, we started looking at, well, how do we name this project that we're going to do? Because I want him to feel like one of the first museum anthropologists and one of the youngest museum anthropologists, Black museum anthropologists. And I said, because you've been learning this from the time you were born, because you hang out with Grandma, right? Mm-hmm. And when we continued to work on it, he said he wanted to tell the people at his church what he was doing. And they were having a book fair. So we put some of the things that we had learned about Chatham County, and we found 8 museums, including the Kaya, and we started to do the anthropology of it and turn it into a cookbook, right? Yeah. And learning the stories of those founders or participants in these museums. And so we were sitting in the car going to Pinpoint, and we started looking at, like, what do we call this cookbook? It's about culture, it's about Black museums and everything. So it was going to be the Chatham County cookbook. And I was like, oh, no, we can't do that. And we were going to call it Culture Keepers, like the other book that I had done on Florida. And so it still wasn't working. And so we had, what are the ways that we can do this that people will learn it? And he came up with, we're still going to call it Culture Keepers, and we're going to call it the Culture Keepers Cookbook. And somehow it ended up with 3 Ks and KKK, the way he was doing it. And he was like, I said, well, okay, that's what we'll do. And then he said, but Grandma, you always told me that that's not good. Some people could be mad about that. And so we started looking up culture, and we realized that culture as a noun can also be equated with those who have an extreme sense of their own history and culture. So then we decided to, he wanted it to be a whole organization. And it was, I know what the 3 Ks were. It was going to be the Kaya Kids Culture Club. Mm. And we couldn't do those 3 Ks because Kaya, Kiah, was the name of the museum that we were fighting to save here in Savannah from being demolished. Mm. And so we wanted that to be somewhere. And he says, well, it could be the kids like me who want to work, with you and others with museums. And so rather than do that, we can be the Kaya Kids, but it'll be a culture club, and it will be like the capital K. So he came up with the Kaya Kids Culture Club, which is the work that's being done to capture the stories, particularly here in Georgia, but throughout the African diaspora. And those people who are, I told him about the Aboriginals. They call their museums keeping places. And so he said that that's what we do. We keep the history, we keep the culture. We are keepers of the history and culture of these Black institutions. And we want to remember and honor those people who were associated with it. So he and all those things that happen when you're dealing with grandkids, they come up with things in ways that we hadn't thought about before.
Terrific. Well, he really learned a lot from you and contributed a lot. That's
yeah. And now he's a book author.
Wow. Well, let's go back to your founding
Okay.
ADMI, and could you discuss a little bit about its mission, and maybe the goals and accomplishments so far, and what's left to do?
Okay. Happy to do that. As I mentioned earlier, when I was in Baltimore at Morgan State University, they had the Center for Museum Studies and Historic Preservation. That was their museology program. And as a part of that, the director of that museum, that center, was Mr. Gabriel Tanabe. And he learned under James Lewis. He came from Nigeria. And just an amazing person. And I met him because he was a member of the African American Museum Association. And he was the one that told me that directory is something that I needed to look at. So it really was his idea, but I think he was hoping I would stay in Baltimore. But like you, Chip, it took one blizzard and I was out of there. I was like, I'll take Mama to, to somewhere else. And he said, but don't forget to do this work. And so I began to start to look at how to do it. So it was formed with my kids, my grandkids, and some of the anthropologists that had worked with me on other programs and community individuals. But it really wasn't started with Black museum anthropologists, because as I said earlier, it's not too many of us. I mean, and I'm always looking for those who professionally engage in this work, and they're just not a lot. I can't even name them on one hand that work specifically with Black museums. There are museum anthropologists. So to not take up too much time, what happened was that I started to when I came to Georgia, I was in the Atlanta area in Fairburn, and I started working with Dr. Ira Harrison. He was aging, and he was the author, along with Dr. Faye Harrison, of the African American Pioneers in Anthropology. So Dr. Harrison asked, when he found out that I was coming to the area, he asked me if I would co-edit this next volume, University of Illinois Press. He had already gotten a kind of contract with them, but he said he couldn't do it on his own. So I kind of put down some things to work with Dr. Ira on getting the second generation of African American pioneers in anthropology published. And so while that work was being done, it was giving me a chance to work with the Association of Black Anthropologists to sort of find out, if I could find some of these other people who were part of my tribe. But it also helped me to look for those who were pioneers in anthropology to see if any of them had not gotten this title as Black Museum anthropologists, but were also working in that area. And John Gwaltney was one, so my chapter in that book was on Gwaltney. And so it kept me doing the work on an academic level, but I needed to do more to get younger people involved. And so the work of the CFS AADMC, my center, started to get some attention because you keep throwing it out there, but people couldn't remember who I was and what I did. It was just way too long. And so it brought me here to Savannah. I went to a seminar at Savannah State because they were going to start a historic preservation program. So that never happened, but they ended up asking me to teach. I went back. I came here because I was going to go and get a second degree in historic preservation. I thought that would be the thing. And because the Kayas also were instrumental, they were Morgan graduates. Mm-hmm. They were graduates of Morgan in Baltimore. They had the first museum I worked on was not the one here, but the one in Baltimore, which was a part of the umbrella of museums that were under Morgan State University. I thought the same thing could happen here. But the beauty of it was that my students helped me narrow down that long name. They worked as sort of volunteer directors to how to build this, how to do this, and they worked to sort of factor out the work of for what later became African Diaspora Museology Institute. It was supposed to be a children's museum of anthropology. That's what those students really wanted. They was like, Dr. D, we need to learn this before we are, in college to do something else. We need to, sort of grow up and start to be trained for this. But, that's one of the things that happens when you're working with young people. They help you with other things. So that the work of ADME is really to, in its most narrow term, is to tell the stories of Black museums, to make sure that they are documented, whether they are still in existence, endangered species, so to speak, especially in a climate now with sort of counseling a lot of things that have to do with Black history and culture. But ADME's work, ADME's mission is to basically document, record, protect, advocate for Black museums wherever they exist in the world. And our key programs and projects really fall into 4 subfields. We're continuing the work of the directory, so that's Blacks in Museum is our core program. Black Museum Anthropology, BMA, is the second part of what we do. The third subfield or field work project that we're doing has to do with Museums US. That means that we're looking to document museums in every state to help them to connect with either the AAAM or with us to make sure that their stories are documented and we collect them. We do a 21-day challenge for people to get a museum-going habit, to know the museums that are in their area. And the fourth field is youth empowerment. We want young people to be able to take up and do that work. Under youth empowerment, the Kaya Kids Culture Club, or Taj's group, my grandson Taj, we just got accepted as a program under the African American Civil Rights Network with a trunk that we call One Woman, Two Museums, which tells a story. It chronicles Virginia Kaya, who was the founder of the Kaya Museum, and her husband Calvin, but her story in civil rights museology, because we need to situate that museum in terms of the work that's missing in the U.S. On civil rights. It's more than Martin Luther King Jr. and those that we know. We need to know how to recognize how people fight and support social justice and their rights. So I know I'm long-winded, so bear with me.
No, that's great.
But that's it. That's the work of ADME, its mission, its evolution, and we're still working today to try to make sure that Black museums are not forgotten, and they're not lost, and that they're recognizable to everyone.
So there's a lot of work left to do.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And you're looking for help.
Always.
Always. Okay. Well, you mentioned Savannah State, and that was pretty important also for your growth. And could you give us a little bit more information about what you did at Savannah State?
Be happy to. For the purposes of this project that we're doing, I kind of consider Savannah State my neighborhood. Because it's the one that attracted me to Savannah, and so I came to Savannah State in 2014, as I mentioned earlier, because I was going to take advantage of the opportunity to go back to school. I tell my kids and my grandkids and anybody else that I meet, we never should stop learning. So if I could take just a minute, I'd like to get a drink of water.
Oh, yeah, please. Well, it's appropriate to never stop learning, since we're in the headquarters of the Learning Center, which is all about successful aging and not stopping learning, and we share that objective. And,
okay.
And I'm glad that you're passing it on to your grandchildren too.
So, excuse me again. I taught Introduction to Anthropology, and one of the graduate students that was at Savannah State, Terrence Grasty, did the first trunk on museum anthropology, and it focused on the Kaya. But students had special projects that they did with learning to do ethnography. And that's actually doing some of what we're doing now to learn from people how they do what they do. And so they were given assignments as they would learn the different subfields. So Terrence, being in the graduate program in public history, was one of the students that I went to speak to the public history class. And he was fascinated by it and asked if there was something that he could do to help. And he would come and talk to me and see where some of the things that he was doing would fit in. And he loved the idea that some of the students had come up with, because I wanted them to work with him as they formed advisory teams for the different programs and things that we were doing, because I wanted them to apply anthropology. And because there was no one else at Savannah State teaching anthropology, I could do a lot When they got through this introduction class, they knew a lot of things. They had a chance to go and do to churches. To they did field work and library studies. They were able to work at different museums and work with collections and write up those things. So the writing skills helped them with other things that they were doing. They learned how to sit with advisory committees and form their own advisory committees. And the kids came up with their own youth advisory team and advised me to change the name. Some students worked with me within the Kyla Brownville community that's close to here in West Savannah, where the Kaya Museum was, and they would take care of the grounds. They formed. We actually talked people at Armstrong before it became Georgia Southern into doing an archaeological dig at the Kaya as a community dig to and we got them to help us with writing a report that is now the first phase of it became an important piece in helping with the historic designation of certain places because they were about to update the historic Kyla Brownville community. And it was just the neighbors got to know them, and some of the people that were there in the neighborhood. When they would go to the neighbor association meetings, I would take students that were there that could go. And it was a rich experience for them because anthropology wasn't just about taking a test and filling out information to pass the test. They do that too much. They need to know how to apply the things that they're learning to the everyday world that they're in. So it was really rich for me and to get their advice, and they put that advice into reports and things as a part of their finals and things. So they had to get involved in anthropology. It wasn't just okay, let me take this quick class to fill my humanities credit. Some of them came in like me for the first class that I took, never ever having heard the word or knowing what it is, but they all left learning. Sometime when I see them, when I'm out in the community, they say, Dr. D, I still know I enjoyed that class and I can apply all of it. They don't sit through a church service anymore in the same way. They look to see, like, how did this evolve? How did this understand? So it's more than history because anthropology is about us. It's about the human experience, how we do the things that we do. And even them learning to, communicate with each other and to talk to each other. There were activities and things that were done that helped them with that. And then, of course, the golden A+ was to get that museum anthropology down, and Black museum anthropology in particular. So Savannah State was good for me. I think it was really divine for me to be there because I could have turned around and said, well, no, you didn't have the program that I was there for. But I think, I was drawn here. I think it was nothing but God that I'm here and that it afforded me the opportunity. I had the freedom to do the work while I was there, and even now, even though I'm not in the classroom and I'm not teaching, I'm set up in my favorite place in the world, in the library, as a scholar in residence, so I can continue to do the work and the research that's needed. So, you know, this organization is loosely called an institute, but it really is a combination of those of us who want to research and write up the work of Black museums to make sure that they stay on the landscape.
Well, this has been fascinating. Are there anything else that you wanted to say, or I can close up the interview?
I think I've said quite a bit.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. D, if I can call you that. Now, I've been your student for a little while here. You know, you are a builder, a teacher, of course, an author, and above all, a motivator. So I hope people that listen to this interview will be motivated. And thank you so much for sharing this extraordinary journey with us. I think others will agree that your work not only enriches Savannah, but helps preserve and uplift the broader African diaspora story. We're honored to have you be part of the Everyone Has a Story initiative, and thanks again.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.